They say stories can transport us, but no one ever talks about the ones that don't bring you back. It started on a gray, rainy Thursday, the kind of afternoon where the clouds hang so low, it feels like they're pressing down on your thoughts. Sarah had picked Eli up early from school. He'd been coughing all morning, and she didn't want to risk it turning into anything worse. They stopped by the corner thrift store on the way home. It was a small, dusty place, tucked between a boarded-up bakery and a barber shop that hadn't seen customers in years. The kind of store you walk past 100 times without ever going inside. But that day, Eli tugged at her sleeve and said, "Let's go in, Mama. I want a new book." Sarah hesitated. The place looked abandoned, more graveyard than storefront. But Eli's eyes were big and pleading, and her resistance wore down. The air inside was stale, the scent of old paper and forgotten things. Shelves creaked under the weight of discarded memories, tattered clothes, broken clocks, porcelain dolls with cracked faces. And in the back, near a crooked wooden ladder that led to nowhere, was a single shelf marked children's. The books were stacked unevenly, leaning against one another like they were holding each other up out of exhaustion. That's when Sarah saw it. A thin, cloth-bound book with no author's name and a title embossed in faded silver, Whispers in the Wardrobe. Eli reached for it before she could stop him. The cover illustration was simple, a closed wardrobe with shadows spilling out from under its doors like smoke. The artwork was not exactly scary. There was something ... off. The wardrobe's handles were shaped like human hands. Sarah turned it over. There was no synopsis, no barcode, no publisher's logo. A short line carved into the back in thin, jagged handwriting. "Do not read aloud, ever." She laughed nervously. "Must be part of the story," she muttered, running her thumb over the words. What? But they weren't inked. They were etched into the book itself, as if someone had taken a knife to the cover. Eli clutched the book tightly. "This one," he said. Sarah looked at the frail old man behind the counter. He hadn't spoken a word since they entered. His skin looked thin as paper, eyes sunken like he hadn't slept in weeks. She raised the book. "How much?" He didn't move, just whispered, "It's yours now." Sarah frowned, reaching for her wallet. "No, really, how, once it's chosen, belongs to the reader." He turned his back and walked away through a curtain of beaded strings. Vanishing without a sound, Sarah stood there, uncertain. But Eli was already halfway to the door. Clutching the book like a treasure, she followed, brushing off the man's strange words as one of those weird thrift shop quirks. Back home. Eli curled up on the couch with a blanket and handed her the book. "Read it to me," he whispered. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Don't you want to look at the pictures first? I want you to read it," he insisted. She hesitated. That warning on the back, it lingered in her mind like the aftertaste of a bad dream, but it was just a story, right? She opened the book. The first page was blank. Then, as she turned it, ink bled across the paper like it was being written in real time. Slowly, a title formed at the top. Chapter 1. The Door That Shouldn't Open. She blinked. "Weird printing error," she mumbled, mostly to herself. Eli snuggled deeper under the blanket, so she began to read. Asterisk, asterisk, some doors stay shut for a reason. But when you speak their names, they remember how to open. Sarah's voice echoed through the living room, quiet and careful. The story began harmlessly enough. A curious boy named Thomas discovers a wardrobe in the attic of his new home. One night, he hears soft knocks coming from inside it. 3 soft raps, every night at the same time. Knock, knock, knock. Eli listened. Silently, his eyes wide, his thumb pressed against his lower lip. It wasn't squirming or distracted like he usually was when she read to him. He was locked in, completely immersed. As she turned the page, a sudden breeze moved through the room, brushing past her neck like a cold breath. She looked at the window, closed. "Strange," she muttered. She continued reading. Thomas begins. "To hear whispers when the lights go out. They say his name. They tell him to open the wardrobe. But Thomas's mother warns him, never open what knocks unless you know who's inside." Sarah's voice wavered slightly. She cleared her throat and glanced at the fireplace. It hadn't been lit in weeks, but now it smelled faintly of smoke. Eli's blanket shifted as if something beneath it moved. She looked, but there was nothing. There, she flipped to the next page. Thomas finally opens the wardrobe. Inside is not darkness. Inside is a hallway, long and possible, made of crooked doors. Each door is labeled with a child's name. The final door reads, Eli. Sarah blinked. That can't be right. She looked back at the previous page. There it was, as plain as day. Eli's daughter's hands trembled slightly as she turned the page again. The story described a dim, flickering hallway of voices pleading to be let out. One child's voice was louder than the rest. It sounded exactly like Mommy. Sarah froze. She turned to Eli. Did you say something? He looked at her, eyes blank. Mommy. He repeated in a different voice, higher, distant, as if the sound came from somewhere else. She closed the book sharply. Everything went still. The fireplace stopped smelling like smoke. The air settled. Eli blinked a few times, rubbed his eyes, and asked, Why'd you stop? Sarah forced a smile. That's enough for tonight. It's late. But I want to know what happens next, Eli protested. We'll read more tomorrow, she said, standing quickly. She placed the book on the kitchen counter, away from Eli, away from herself. Later that night, after Eli had gone to bed, Sarah poured herself a glass of wine and sat at the counter, staring at the book. The cloth covers seemed darker now, wetter. The warning on the back appeared deeper, almost fresh, like it had just been scratched in. Did not read aloud. Ever. She opened the book again. The pages she had read were still there, but a new page had appeared at the end of chapter 1. One that hadn't been there earlier, it read. The mother began to question. The book didn't like questions. Her breath caught in her throat. She closed the book slowly, as if afraid it might snap back at her. She slid it into the drawer and locked it. That night, she dreamt of doors. Endless doors. And something breathing behind every single one. Asterisk, asterisk, when you invite a story into your home, it makes itself comfortable. And sometimes, it refuses to. Leave. Sarah woke up to the sound of whispering. It wasn't the television. It wasn't Eli talking in his sleep. The whispering seemed to come from the walls themselves, low, garbled, like a broken radio trying to tune into a secret. She sat up and checked the baby monitor on her nightstand. Eli was sound asleep, sprawled sideways across his bed, his blanket half dragged onto the floor. But the whispers continued. She tiptoed down the hallway. The sound grew louder near the kitchen, and then stopped. The silence that followed wasn't. Peaceful, it was loaded, like the house itself was holding its breath. When she turned on the kitchen light, she froze. The drawer, the one where she'd locked the book, it was open. The key was still in her nightstand drawer. She checked her hands, trembled as she approached. The book sat there, perfectly still, perfectly quiet. Its cover was slightly more worn, as though it had aged overnight. She didn't touch it. She just closed the drawer this time without locking its hand, backed away. The next morning, Sarah found a drawing on Eli's desk. It was crude drawn, with crayons, but chilling in its detail. A tall, thin figure, with no face, stood at the end of a hallway lined with crooked doors. And above it, scribbled in a red crayon, were the words, "The door that breathes." She confronted him gently. Eli, where did you learn that? He blinked, confused. It's in the book. Sarah's skin prickled. But I didn't read that part yet, shrugged, and went back to coloring that day. Little things began to shift. The hallway light would flicker whenever Sarah passed. The family photo on the wall began to tilt to the left every time she straightened it. Her bedroom mirror showed smudges, long finger-like prints she hadn't made. Eli's sleepwalking returned. She found him twice, standing in front of the wardrobe in his room, whispering, "Knock, knock, ... The same 3 taps again and again. On the 3rd night, she hid the book in the garage. By the 4th, it was back on the kitchen counter. She Tried calling the thrift shop. No answer. She drove there herself. The shop was gone. Not just closed. Gone. Boarded up. Empty shelves visible through the dusty windows. Like no one had stepped foot inside for years. She banged on the glass. No response. Just a flyer flapping loose on the door, advertising a book fair from 1997. Sarah backed away slowly, her heart pounding. She got in her car, checked her rearview mirror. Behind her in the shop's window stood the same man from before, the thin, silent one with papery skin. But this time, he was holding a book, her book. He raised a finger to his. When she turned around to get a better look, he was gone. Asterisk, asterisk, back home. Eli was already sitting on the couch with the book in his lap. "Can we read again tonight?" he asked, his eyes unnaturally wide, too bright. "I want to know what's behind my door." Sarah's knees nearly buckled. "How do you know there's a door with your name on it?" He smiled. "Because it told me." Stories are told by voices. But sometimes, stories begin to speak for themselves. Sarah wasn't sleeping anymore. Not really. She'd nap in 10-minute bursts, always with the lights on, always with the door cracked open. But each time she drifted off, her dreams returned to the hallway from the book, its doors, endless and flickering, its whispers growing louder. She needed answers. Not the kind found in dreams, the kind found in records. In history, on a desperate Thursday morning, Sarah left Eli with a neighbor and drove to the public library. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. She only knew one thing. Whispers in the Wardrobe wasn't just a story. She started with the local archives. Children's books, self-published titles, obscure horror fiction. Nothing. But then, in the microfilm section buried beneath a 1932 edition of the Waverly County Gazette, she found a headline. Local author disappears after publishing controversial children's book she read aloud in a whisper. Elias G. Hawthorne, known for his experimental storytelling methods, vanished days after self-releasing a children's book titled Whispers in the Wardrobe. The book was said to contain themes too dark for young readers and reportedly cause nightmares, trances, and strange behavior in those who read it aloud. No copies were ever sold commercially. Most were destroyed or lost. Only one survived. Sarah's breath caught. The article ended with a quote from Hawthorne himself from an old interview. "Books are spells. Just don't think of them that way. When read aloud, they cast themselves." She sat there, stunned. The date of the article. June 6, 1932. Exactly 93 years ago to the day. She checked the clock. It was 1:11 p.m. Her phone buzzed. Text message from unknown. You shouldn't have looked. Her blood ran cold. She shoved her things into her bag and sprinted out of the library, heart hammering like a drum. Back home, things had changed. Again, the air was thick, heavy like syrup. The curtains in the living room fluttered, though the windows were closed. The hallway smelled like mildew and something sharp as own. Like a storm was waiting to be born inside the walls. Eli was drawing again. Cut a picture of a tall, shadowy man with words scrawled around him like a chant. He wrote us. We remember, he wrote us. You remember. She grabbed the book from the counter and flipped it open. New pages. Pages. She hadn't read. One described her exact movements from the night before, locking the book in the garage, hearing whispers, waking in sweat. Another described her standing in the library that day, even the article she read, and then worse, a page she hadn't lived yet. That night she tried to stop the story. But stories don't stop. Not when read aloud. Not when spoken into the air. The words become roots, and roots must grow. The final line chilled her to the core. Tonight the wardrobe opens. That evening Sarah unplugged every light in the house. She wrapped the book in towels, stuffed it in a metal pot, and placed it in the oven, not to bake it, just to keep it sealed. Wasn't sure why she thought it would help. Logic had stopped working days ago. She took Eli to her room, locked the door, laid beside him until his breathing softened into sleep, and then knock, knock, not. At the front door, not from the hallway, from the wardrobe in Eli's room, even though she had locked it, even though no one had touched it in weeks. 3 slow knocks, just like in the story. Asterisk, asterisk, there comes a moment when you stop reading the story, because the story begins reading you. That night, Sarah didn't sleep. She sat on the floor of her bedroom with her back pressed firmly against the door, staring at the hallway. Her ears strained for the slightest noise, but none came. At dawn, she crept to the oven. The pot was still. There are the towels inside, untouched. But the book was gone. She found it on Eli's bed. Lying open, Eli was still asleep, but his hand was resting on one of the pages. As if the story had called to him in his dreams, she eased it away from his fingers and read the passage where the book had opened. Her heart dropped. She thought hiding the book would help. But stories don't like being locked away. Stories want to be told. And now the story was inside the boy, whispering, writing, waking. Her eyes darted to Eli. His lips were moving, no sound, but words, whispers. She leaned in closer. His eyes flew open, and in a voice not his own, Eli said, "Page 37 is your favorite. Read it again." Sarah stumbled back, dropping the book on the floor. Eli blinked once, twice, then sat up slowly. "What's wrong, Mommy? You were talking in your sleep." "No, I wasn't." She didn't argue. She couldn't. Later, that morning, she took the book to the backyard. She tried to burn it. The pages wouldn't catch. No. The flames curled around it like water around stone. No matter how long she held it in the fire, it came out unmarked, not even warm. She poured gasoline. On it, lit a match. The fire jumped high briefly and then nothing. The book remained, but this time when she opened it, page with her own handwriting, slanted, quick, panicked. She hadn't written it, but it was unmistakably hers. "Help me, I can't stop reading. I don't want to, but it won't let me stop." Beneath that, another line in a thin, elegant scrawl. "You wrote this yesterday." Sarah slammed the book shut, heart hammering. Her knees buckled and she fell to the grass. It was rewriting her memory, or worse, it was using her to write the story that night. She decided to test something. She placed a voice recorder on her nightstand. Before going to sleep, she whispered to herself, "Don't trust your dreams." The next morning, the recorder had captured 3 hours of audio. Most of it was static, breathing, the creak of the house settling. But at 3:03 a.m., she heard her own voice clearly, reading line after line from the book. Then silence, and then another voice, not older, deeper, like gravel dragged across wood. "Thank you for continuing the story." She rushed to the book. A new chapter had appeared, chapter 4, when the reader becomes the written. And at the bottom of the page, in bold etched text, "You are no longer reading. You are being read." Asterisk, asterisk. The most terrifying stories aren't the ones we read. They're the ones passed down without anyone knowing. Sarah stood in the hallway, paralyzed. The book was no longer just a thing, it was aware. It wrote. In her hand, spoke in her voice, twisted time and memory like pages in the wind. She had to find out more. Not about the book, about herself. Later that day, she visited her childhood home, a small, ivy-wrapped house on the edge of town that hadn't changed in 30 years. Her mother, Margaret, answered the door with her usual faint smile. But the moment Sarah asked, "Do you remember a book called Whispers in the Wardrobe?" Her mother's face drained of color. She didn't speak. She just turned and walked away. Sarah followed her into the living room. Margaret sat down slowly, her hands trembling in her lap. "I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that," she whispered. Sarah sat across from her. "Why not?" Her mother's voice dropped lower. "Because I don't remember much after I read it." Sarah stiffened. "You read it?" "I did. When you were 5. Her voice cracked. "You were having nightmares and I found this old book at a church rummage sale. The cover looked innocent enough, but the minute I started reading aloud ... things changed." Sarah's heart pounded. "What kind of things?" "Shadows in the mirrors. Doors opening at night. You speaking in voices I didn't recognize. I only read 2 chapters. Sarah leaned forward. "Then what?" "I woke up. One night with the book open in my lap, I don't remember opening it. I don't remember reading. But it was open to a page that said she gave the story to her daughter, and the story continued. Sarah felt like the floor had been pulled from beneath her. Mom, she whispered, "You passed it to me." Margaret wiped her eyes. "I thought I'd burned it. I swear to God." Sarai put it in the fireplace and watched it burn. "But the next morning, it was on your bookshelf." Sarah's voice was barely a breath. "It's happening again." Margaret looked at her daughter and then almost too quietly said, "The book doesn't stay with one person. It's passed down, like a curse, like a story that never ends." Sarah drove home in silence. When she stepped inside the house, it was darker than before, not in the way of lighting, in energy, presence. And Eli was standing in the hallway, facing the wardrobe. The door was open. "Eli," she whispered. He turned slowly. His eyes were black, not just the pupils, the entire eye, glossy, reflective, like ink. "I met the man inside," he said calmly. Sarah ran and slammed the wardrobe shut. "Don't say another word." But he just smiled and whispered, "You're in the book now, Mommy. You were always in the book." She held him tightly, pressing his face to her chest, praying it was still her son inside. And then behind her, she heard pages flipping on their own. On the floor lay the book, wide open. A brand new line etched across the bottom of the page. The mother understood now. This wasn't a story with an ending. It was an infection, a memory, a ritual, a cycle. There comes a point when you realize you're no longer living in your house. You're living in the story. And the story wants to finish itself. Sarah didn't remember falling asleep, but she woke up screaming. Her arms were covered in ink. Not bruises, not scratches, ink. Lines of text ran across her forearms like tattoos, words from the book, etched into her skin. She rushed to the bathroom and scrubbed furiously with soap, steel wool, with bleach. The words wouldn't come off, and as she looked up into the mirror, her reflection didn't match her movements. It blinked when she didn't. It smiled when she frowned. Then it whispered, "You're just a character now." She shattered the mirror with her elbow. Blood pooled in the sink and still. The text remained on her skin. Later that night, Sarah made a decision. She had to end it, not hide the book, not burn it. She had to go inside. If the wardrobe was a door, if the book was a map, then somehow there had to be a way to stop it. She waited until Eli was asleep, this time in her bed, where she could watch him, where she could protect him. Then she walked to the wardrobe. Its door creaked open, before she even touched it. Inside there were no clothes, only darkness, and beyond the darkness, a hallway. She stepped in. The world inside the wardrobe didn't obey physics or time. The hallway was infinite. The floor bent beneath her feet like breathing lungs. The walls pulsed like veins, and on either side, hundreds, thousands of crooked doors, each marked with a name. Some she recognized, her mother, her grandmother, and her own name. Sarah scrawled on the nearest door. Her hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob. From behind it, she heard crying, a child's sob, her own voice. She yanked the door open and found herself as a 5-year-old, huddled in a corner, clutching the book. Whispers circled around the room like smoke. She was inside. A memory, no, she was inside the story, Sarah screamed. The younger version of herself looked up and vanished. The book in her arms hit the floor and opened itself. A gust of wind tore down the hallway, pages flying everywhere, slapping the walls like thunder. And then she heard it. The author, a voice, deeper than anything human, echoed through the hallway. "Why do you fight the end? The story needs a reader, a narrator, a vessel. Finish it." She ran. Door after door slammed shut around her. She could hear whispers rising like a tide. "Read us, read us, read us." She stumbled into a room and slammed the door behind her. It was her own living room, except everything was reversed. Photos hung upside down. The book floated midair, its pages flipping on their own. The author's voice again. Tell the ending, or your son becomes the next chapter. Sarah clutched her ears and screamed, "No." And just then she remembered something, a line in the book. The story ends when the child refuses the final page. That was it. She had to get to Eli, not to protect him, but to tell him not to listen, not to read, not to finish the story. She burst through. The final Dorand was back in her house, except it wasn't quite her house. The sky outside the windows was pitch black, no stars, no moon, just nothing. Eli stood in the center of the room, the book open in his hands. Tears rolled down his cheeks. "Mommy, it says I have to say the last line." Sarah screamed, "Don't!" He looked up, trembling. "It says if I don't read it, you'll stay trapped in the book forever." She walked toward him slowly. "Eli, listen to me. Stories only have power if we let them finish. If we stop reading, we stop feeding it." He hesitated. The book vibrated in his hands. The words began glowing red. He squeezed his eyes shut and said, "I won't read the ending." The book dropped to the floor with a thud, and everything went still. No wind, no whispers, no wardrobe. Asterisk, asterisk. Some stories don't die when you stop reading them. They simply wait for the next sentence. When the book hit the floor, time itself seemed to freeze. Sarah wrapped her arms around Eli, holding him like she hadn't in years. He was shaken not from fear, but from release. Whatever had held him, whispered through him, read through him, was gone. For now the book lay closed. On the hardwood floor, still, silent, and yet Sarah could feel it pulsing. Not visibly, but somewhere deeper, like a thought that wouldn't leave. It hadn't been defeated, only paused. But the strange part, the wardrobe was gone, not just closed, gone. In its place, only blank wall. Eli whispered, "Is it over?" Sarah looked at the book. "No," she said. "It's hiding." That night, she dreamed again. But it wasn't like before. This time, she wasn't lost. She was being watched. She wandered endless rooms, each one more impossible than the last. One filled with floating chairs. One with a mirror that showed her with her mouth sewn shut. Another with a ticking grandfather clock made entirely of bones. And in each room, a page fluttered from the ceiling. Each page had her name. Each page was written in her voice. In the final room, the author was waiting. Not a shadow anymore, but a figure, tall, thin, a stitched mouth, empty sockets for eyes, long, ink-dripping fingers. "Why didn't you let the boy finish the ending?" it asked without speaking. Sarah stood tall. "Because the story isn't yours anymore," she said. "It's mine." The author hissed and raised a hand. Ink exploded from the walls, wrapping around her like vines. But Sarah remembered something else, something her mother once whispered before falling asleep. Years ago, if a story writes you in, you can write your way out. She reached inside her dream and grabbed the only weapon she had. Her voice, she began to narrate, out loud, her own ending. The woman faced the author and spoke her own truth. She wasn't a character. She was a mother, a protector, voice that couldn't be silenced. The ink recoiled. The author shrieked, stitches ripping open to reveal a mouth filled with empty book pages fluttering in an eternal scream. She shouted over it, and she wrote the final line, not to end the story, but to reclaim it. Everything burst into white light. Sarah awoke. She was in her bed. The morning sun poured through the window. Eli lay beside her, curled up, breathing softly. The wardrobe was still gone. The book was nowhere in sight. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just sat there listening. No whispers, no voices, just silence. Later, she opened her laptop and typed a single line. This children's book wasn't meant to be read out loud. Then she paused and added, "But I read it, and now I know how to stop." She saved the file. She named it Chapter 1. Asterisk, asterisk. The most dangerous stories aren't the ones that end. or the ones waiting for someone to finish them. Weeks passed. Sarah and Eli returned to their routines, slowly, carefully, like walking across thin ice. The nightmares faded. The shadows withdrew. The book was gone, or so Sarah thought. It started with little things. The toaster burned only one side of the bread. The fridge clicked 3 times when it shut, and every morning at 3:03 a.m., the smoke alarm beeped once, though there was no smoke, no fire. And the batteries were new. Then came the drawings. Eli hadn't picked up a crayon in weeks, but now, pictures began appearing, drawings he didn't remember making. A hallway, a figure with a stitched mouth, and one page, just a page filled with one sentence written over and over again. We're still waiting for the last line. Sarah returned to her laptop, the file she had saved. Chapter 1 was open. She didn't remember leaving it that way. A new paragraph had appeared. She thought it was over. But endings are illusions. The story merely waits. Next voice. She backed away from the desk. There was no sound in the room until... Knock, knock, 3 sharp taps. But there was no wardrobe anymore. No door. Just the wall behind the bookshelf. She pressed her ear to it. Silence. Then dashed softly a child's voice. Mommy, you forgot to read the ending. Panic surged in. Her chest, she rushed to Eli's room. He was asleep, or she thought he was, until he sat up without warning and said, He's lonely. Sarah's voice trembled. Who? The author. She stepped back. Eli, go back to sleep. He's not me, Eli said. Not right now. Her heart cracked. He's waiting, the voice added. He said if you don't finish it, he will. Then Eli collapsed into her arms limp, unconscious. Breathing shallow but steady, Sarah carried him to her bed and sat with him all night. Eyes fixed on the wall, where the wardrobe used to be. The truth was crystallizing in her mind. Now, the book had never had an ending. It was unfinished. A curse wrapped. In a cliffhanger, in anyone who read it out loud became its narrator, its vessel, its pen. She opened her laptop again. There was only one way to end it. She had to write the last line, not read it. Write it. She stared at the blinking cursor. On her screen, her fingers hovered above the keyboard. The author's voice echoed in her mind. Careful. Words are roots. Once planted, they grow, Sarah whispered. Then let them grow wild. And she typed, The story ends when no one listens anymore. The screen flickered, the lights dimmed, and for a moment, she heard nothing. No whispering. No knocking, just silence. Then the wardrobe reappeared. Asterisk. Asterisk. It wasn't in the hallway, not in the bedroom. It was standing behind her. Right there in the reflection of her laptop screen open, just a crack. Pages fluttered in the windless air. And inside, CHAIRA, desk, and a manuscript halfway written. Sometimes the final page isn't a conclusion, it's a beginning, and not everyone gets to write it. Sarah froze. The wardrobe loomed behind her, its door open wide, revealing that eerie room inside a desk with an unfinished manuscript. A single chair and shadows swirling like smoke. She heard Eli's shallow breathing behind her. But the room felt colder than ice. Her mind screamed, Run! Don't look back. But curiosity and desperation pulled her. Forward she stepped inside. The air was thick with ink and old paper. The manuscript's pages fluttered wildly, words rearranging themselves as if alive. Write your ending. Her hand trembled as she reached for the quill resting on the desk. Ink spilled onto the floor, black as night. Her eyes darted to the shadows creeping along the walls, figures flickering in and out, whispering her name. She sat down, with a shaky breath. She began to write. The words poured from her fingers. This story belongs to no one but the reader. It will end when the reader decides it should. The shadows recoiled. The wardrobe walls shook. Suddenly, Eli's voice echoed from the hallway. Mommy, help me. Sarah looked up, heart pounding. The door to the hallway was closing fast. Beyond it, Eli was trapped behind a barrier of swirling pages, screaming silently. The author's voice roared, "Finish it, or lose her." Torn between the manuscript and her son, Sarah made a choice. She dashed toward Eli, tearing through the barrier. Pages slapped her face. Hands tried to pull her back. She fought with every ounce of strength. She grabbed Eli's hand. There. Eyes met. "Don't read it," she whispered. Together. They turned to the manuscript. Sarah's fingers hovered over the quill. The shadows howled. She drew a deep breath and wrote the final sentence. "The story ends here. No more voices, no more pages." A blinding white light exploded. The wardrobe vanished. The shadows screamed into silence. And Sarah found herself back in her living room, lie safe in her arms. The book was gone. The house was still. No more whispers. No more knocks. Just peace. For now, asterisk, asterisk, in the aftermath of darkness. Sometimes the greatest treasure is simply surviving the story. The sun rose slowly over the quiet neighborhood. Casting golden light through the windows, Sarah sat on the porch. Eli asleep beside her in a stroller. The nightmares had finally lifted. The whispers had stopped. Life returned to normal. The book was never found? Or maybe it never existed outside the pages of their minds. Neighbors stopped by, commenting on how strong Sarah had been. "How did you survive that?" They'd ask. She'd smile, brushing a stray hair from Eli's forehead. "Love," she'd say. "Love is the richest story of all." But sometimes, when the wind shifted just right, she thought she heard a faint whisper, a soft reminder. The story never truly ends. It only waits for the next reader. Sarah glanced down at Eli, smiling. "Not yet," she whispered. Asterisk. Asterisk. Some stories leave marks. Some stories leave lessons. And some stories leave promises. Sarah looked down at Eli playing in the garden, laughter spilling from his small lips. The past was behind them, but its shadow lingered, a reminder of what they had survived. She made a silent vow, no matter what stories crossed their path, no matter what voices tried to pull them back into the darkness, ... she would protect. Eli, with every word, with every breath, with every promise, because some things in life aren't bought or sold. They're earned. The book may have been forgotten by the world, but its echoes would live on in the hearts of those brave enough to face the story. And Sarah, she was ready. Asterisk, asterisk. Thanks for watching this terrifying, scary story. Hoped you liked it. If you watched till the end, please comment "end" so that we could understand you were with us till the end. If you've ever had a creepy experience, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories, as well as please let us know, where are you watching from? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. Last but not the least, before leaving, please check out the horror story ebook. Link in the description. See you in the next one. Until next time, stay safe and stay out of the shadows. Good night.